تعمل تكامل التقنيات على الاستفادة القصوى من الخصائص المشتركة بين الأنظمة والمنصات المختلفة، ولما للبيانات الأهمية الكبيرة لمجمل هذه التقنيات فإن تكاملها مع تقنية بلوكتشين سوف تعظم من الاستفادة منها. دعونا نستكشف ذلك من خلال الجلسة القادمة، والتي سيدور النقاش فيها حول تكامل التقنيات الحالية مع بلوكتشين. من ضمن هذه التقنيات الذكاء الاصطناعي والبيانات الضخمة وإنترنت الأشياء والخدمات السحابية وتقنيات أمن المعلومات. The integration of technologies makes the most of the common characteristics of different systems and platforms. Data is of great importance to all of these technologies. Their integration with blockchain technology will maximize their benefits. Let's explore this in the next session, which will discuss the integration of existing technologies with blockchain, including artificial intelligence, big data, Internet of Things, cloud services, and information security technologies, with Mr. James Roy as a moderator. For the panelists we invite for IoTs and integration of platforms, Mr. Tom Trowbridge. For banking infrastructure, Mr. Kamal Yousfi. For oil and machine learning, Mr. Darius Montivilla. For supply chain and trade finance, Mr. Shivansan Misilmani. For tokenization infrastructure, Mr. Justin Smith.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for your time. I'm James Roy Poulter, the CEO of The Reserve. We're an investment bank and strategy consulting firm that specializes in digital assets and our distributed future. Today, I've got some esteemed panelists, and I'm going to give them all the opportunity to introduce themselves in a second. But if there's one key thing that I would like us all to learn and understand from the kind of next hour that we get to converse together, it's that blockchain is no longer a concept. People are and have been implementing this technology and receiving the benefits, whether those are in cost or in additional trust in the data that they rely on every day, for years. And it really is at a stage now where we can start taking, our knowledge of this and implementing this and deriving benefits from that. It's kind of interesting because, for those of you that have been following the markets, you may think that things are going badly in this space. As the Reserve, we also invest into this future. And if you look 12 months ago, if we were sat on this stage, you'd probably think that the market cap or the value of the technology in this space was worth 10 times more than it is today at current market prices. I think the challenge is that tells the complete wrong story, and that actually over the last 12 months there's been incredible value that's been generated in the sector, and the actual implementation and use of the technology is only exponentially increasing. You can actually look back, and Justin, in his opening remarks, talked about the origins of this space in Bitcoin, just over 10 years ago. But there were governments that were implementing distributed ledgers even before the creation of Bitcoin. Estonia is the leading example as a digital government in this space. After its kind of attacks on some of its core infrastructure and systems in 2006, it knew it needed to be able to trust the data that it, as a government, relied on even more deeply every day. And so it started implementing blockchain technology as a government 12 years ago. And actually, Estonia now, as a government, runs most of its core systems on a derivation of blockchain. Again, this is not a theory, this technology. It's something that people have been implementing for a decade and now run, national finance departments, national identity, taxes, revenue collection, all on systems that we've been talking about today. Now look, that's enough from me, and I want to give everyone a chance to actually let you understand, I guess, like their journey into this space, to understand, how, I guess, they came to care about this technology and what they're doing right now to actually kind of like implement that. So I might actually start with Kamal, who's probably the panelist that I've known the longest here. Kamal, actually, you had a really interesting background that you started in chemistry. So please, introduce yourself and tell us how you've ended up here.
Thanks, James. I really appreciate it. Kamal is my name, and I'm leading the enterprise advisory within Swisscom. And as James said, I started my career working as a chemistry engineer. I was always fascinated by the German scientists, so that's why I decided to go to Germany and do my master graduation in chemistry. But for a reason or another, I ended up with computer science, because when I wanted to start my master graduation in chemistry, they told me you are not allowed to start in Germany unless you can speak German. So I spent like 6 months learning this language. And exactly 2 weeks before I started my master studies in chemistry, my teacher language took me to a computer science lecture, and he took me to the lecture for robotics. So I was really fascinated about it. And then I decided to shift my decision and go for computer science. And guess what? For computer science, German language is not needed. So it was a funny story. But yeah, after finishing my studies in computer science, I started working as SAP engineer. SAP is like the biggest software company in Europe and the fourth biggest company in the world. I was focusing on databases and distributed databases. Later on, I specialized in artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, and data mining. Many years later, I joined Ernst & Young, which is one of the big 4 companies in the world, leading EY Garage Lab. It was like an internal initiative within EY to drive and investigate, explore emerging technologies, and try to generate values by using and applying these technologies. As I said, within this initiative, we started working and exploring already established concepts and technologies, like, as I said, data mining, predictive analytics, and artificial intelligence. And we try to apply these emerging technologies and methodologies in the financial sector, meaning banking and insurance. Then step by step, we started getting more and more involved in blockchain topics, where we started developing some POCs and helping some companies in Switzerland to make the bridge to distributed ledger technologies. But unfortunately, few months later, before we started, or after we started working on this topic, we have been facing a lot of resistance from EY. Unfortunately, the most of our clients in that point who wanted to start exploring blockchain or adopting blockchain, they were classified in the audit channel, and there is like a very strict, very hard policy which forces all EY or all management consultancies to distinguish between audit channels and consultancy advisory. So, and as we have been classified in advisory, we were not allowed to help our audit clients with exploring emerging technologies. So that's why we had like very difficult options. The first one is either to stop working in the blockchain era and just wait till the audit contract is over. Then you can start knocking the doors and then talking to your clients and find out whether you can help them. or take the another decision, which is leaving EY and start a new journey with a known company or working with another company. And during this phase, we started some discussions with Swisscom. Swisscom is a state-owned company in Switzerland, and it is the largest ICT infrastructure provider within Switzerland. And they recognized potential of blockchain, and they have different and several discussions with us. And then we end up founding a subsidiary of Swisscom, which is mandated and tasked with everything related to blockchains, starting from the crypto infrastructure via tokenizations and ICO advisory, ending up with enterprise blockchain advisory. So that was like a brief summary of my journey.
No, thank you. And I think we'll let the other panelists introduce themselves before we dive into, I guess, the depth and breadth of exposure Swisscom has to change in this space. But Darius, would you also like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm Darius Montevilla. I'm a chairman of Stop Fake Food, and very nice to sit next to the chemist, or expert in chemistry. I'm a physicist, so that combination might do something special. Actually, I'm an expert in ICT for 25 plus years, plus expert in energy ICT, which is related to electricity, plus spent a couple of years being a negotiator on the behalf of my government for strategic energy issues in different projects, and rather important for national energy safety. For the last couple of years, in a good cooperation with one of the angel investors, who is an expert in food safety, and me being an expert in physics, we started what is called Stop Fake Food. And in a very simple way, being able to detect with the accuracy of a state-accredited laboratory what is inside the packaging without even opening it. So if any of you go to the shop as an end user, mainly I looked at the government, then you can take the device, point at the box, and if that's transparent for the light, within minutes you will know what's inside. And if for those who believe that the packaging says what is inside, I am afraid that I have very bad news, because for certain industries, let's start with non-food, that's a little bit more interesting. Cosmetics, if you buy a cosmetics, probability that you will find something else than the packaging says is 4 against 1. Medicine and drugs, it's approximately between 2 against 1 to 4 against 1, depends on the drug in the country. If you believe that you buy very good extra virgin oil in the shop, unless that's a boutique shop where you know people personally and they know personally where from they're buying, the probability will be 5 against 1 that what you are buying is not what the packaging says. And very few people know that, let me look differently. Everybody knows how the gun looks like. Everybody can recognize it. And every government will fight against the illegal trade of arms. That's kind of easy. But not everybody will recognize when there is a fake product the person is about to eat in front of them, even though the packaging is very nice. I'm not even talking about cosmetics, what you will put on your face. Eating is even more dangerous. That's a technology, and now you can detect that in a state-owned laboratory with the equipment, will cost you millions, and with the staff of scientists, which will cost you millions. And it will take time for you, a couple of weeks, and by that time most probably have eaten that thing or put on their faces. And what we do the same, with the same accuracy, just in a matter of a few minutes. And to make it very simple, we spent already 2 years of hard work, so today the solution is, any of you, and I'm very, very clear, any of you in the audience, would you like to, in 10 minutes you can become an expert how to use that solution and detect whether you are buying is fake or origin. Just to give you a hint, if you think that illegal trade of arms is profitable, which it is, faking extra virgin olive oil is significantly, approximately by the factor of 3, depends on where you produce your guns, is more profitable than illegal trade of guns. And the government will not be that eager to trade it because that's so invisible, and that will become inside of you. This is a solution. That sounds pretty simple, but from the scientific perspective, you have to use lasers, physicists. You have to use blockchain, latest technology, and you have to use artificial intelligence to process that huge amounts of data in order to detect what is inside if you don't know. Just to give you an idea, if you take an olive oil, that's not that bad. We can do that very fast. But if you do the crude oil, extra virgin olive oil, for example, it's not that bad. But if you do the crude oil, which you have to process late in the factory, there will be approximately 12,000 of different components in different quantities. And you have to detect the whole thing and give you a correct answer, what is in that small bottle, in less than 5 minutes. Then a huge amount of data is very important. Then artificial intelligence comes into the picture. Otherwise, there is no human in the world that can do that fast, unless you want to spend millions and weeks in a laboratory. In a nutshell, that's what we do.
Thank you very much. Justin, you again opened today's kind of like proceedings on the blockchain side. I'd love to hear more about, I guess, like your journey and how you've ended up sat in that chair.
Yeah, so actually my background is in manufacturing. I worked on an assembly line. That's how I paid my way through school. And my degree is in manufacturing technology, which I'm not even sure still exists in some parts of the world. But I did some programming as part of my education. And so this was sort of a theme. Wherever I went, I ended up doing some programming. And I usually worked in quality departments. So I started my career at Caterpillar, working in quality. And later on, years later, let's skip a decade. I was running my own e-commerce company, and I had originally heard about Bitcoin back in, I think, 2011, 2012, and I had read about it in this sort of very obscure news article, and it said, world's most valuable currency. It's up 3,000% or something this year. And I thought, this is ridiculous. You know, what is this? So I read the article, and it's this new cryptocurrency. It's called Bitcoin, and there's some strange people that just like playing with computers that are using it, and they're using it to buy and sell characters for video games and these sorts of things. And you know, you could buy it, but you had to go through all of these steps, and it was very, very weird. And at the time, I didn't get it at all. I thought, you know, if this is just something where you're gambling, then you can do that with penny stocks, or you can go to the casino or something like this. And I don't care about this, right? But what was really interesting and what stuck in the back of my mind in that article was there was a person who was a merchant, and this person sold socks made out of alpaca wool. So there's this animal that looks like a sheep or something, not a sheep but a llama in South America called an alpaca. And so there was this random person that was taking alpaca wool and making socks out of them and selling them for Bitcoin. It's just the smallest niche market in the world, you know, the smallest niche market you could ever think of. This person was complaining that they had to adjust their prices all the time because the Bitcoin price was always going up, and so they always had to adjust the price of their socks down, right? So, you know, when they started, one pair of socks cost 1 Bitcoin, and then 6 months later, it was half a Bitcoin, and they would constantly have to adjust. And so that was what they were really worried about at the time. I don't know where the alpaca sock person is today, by the way. But this stuck in the back of my mind. And so I still had dismissed it until a couple years later when I was running my e-commerce company, and I was looking for ways to save some money. So one of the problems if you're a merchant and you're running an e-commerce company is typically, like I said earlier, your only option for getting paid is to take a credit card. And this is a problem for a lot of people in a lot of ways. I was lucky in that I could just set up an account with the bank, and they would let me process payments. But they would do so for a fee, right? And the fee was somewhere around 3%. So they took 3% of my gross revenue just for doing nothing, for giving me the opportunity to have a chargeback. Like Shivansan said, chargebacks are when, if you're not familiar with a chargeback is when, like you as a consumer, you would buy something online with a credit card, and then the merchant would send you the goods, and then you would file a complaint with the credit card company that says that you never received the goods, right? So I think it's a criminal thing, but it happens all the time. And it's very, very expensive for a merchant because then typically the bank or the credit card company sides with the consumer, and so they take your money back, they take your money away from you, and you're out the goods that you shipped them. So this is a problem for a lot of people. It wasn't really a problem for me. I had a pretty niche market. But the problem for me was the cost. So I was paying, like I said, 3% in fees off of the gross, and that was really expensive, I thought. So I remembered back to the guy who was accepting Bitcoin for his alpaca stocks, and I thought, maybe I should look into this thing a little bit more, because Bitcoin was still a thing, and it had become a little bit more mainstream in the communities that I was in the technology communities, and I was hearing about it more frequently. And so as I started to really look into it, it really turned out to be a viable option for me to integrate as a payment method. And so really this started me down this journey of understanding and constantly challenging the concept, constantly challenging the technology, always wondering where can it fail, and always going down these paths of how do you keep it secure? Will this thing really take off? How could someone stop it if they wanted to? And so you start asking all of these questions as you start to run a project like this. And I mean, at the end of the day, no one paid with Bitcoin. And no one bought things off my website for Bitcoin. But I was able to offer a discount, actually, that would still save me money. And a lot of people were very interested in this idea of Bitcoin. This was back in 2014. They were interested in it because I was offering a discount. And they said, hey, what is this? Where do I get it? And then every time they would come back and say, that's cool, but it sounds like a lot of work right now, and so I'm just going to pay with a credit card. And that was fine, and I ended up selling that company. But that really started me down this rabbit hole that was inescapable, and it just became my life, basically, because I started to think about things like soft power and how banks, you trust banks with your money, and we need access to our money in order to eat, in order to have clean water. And so it sort of became this idea of, well, access to your own money should really be kind of a human right. And so I'm also, this also influenced my thoughts and ideas about the open source nature of the technology and the freedom of the technology and the freedom that it gives people. And one of my favorite cases early on in my days in Bitcoin was on the Bitcoin Talk forums, which was the only place you could go for information. At the time, there was a merchant in Persia. They would sell shoes. They sold custom leather shoes. And the thing was, these guys could always sell shoes online to international customers. The problem is that they could never get paid. So they couldn't open a PayPal account, and they couldn't get credit card accounts because of sanctions at the time. And so these guys, who had done nothing to anyone other than operate this family shoe store for over 100 years, couldn't join the digital economy. They couldn't become international. They could continue to only sell their goods locally. And so the thing was, when Bitcoin came along, these guys seized on that, and they said, hey, look, we don't need a bank and we don't need a credit card to help us process payments anymore. So what they did is they just made a post on the internet, and they said, hey, we make custom shoes. if you want custom shoes, then just send us your foot measurements, and then we'll make your shoes, send them to you, and then you pay us in Bitcoin. And so I followed this thread with great interest, and a couple weeks later, of course, there was someone in Germany that got involved in this deal and said, here's my foot measurements, and they did it all in public. And then a couple weeks after that, the shoes showed up, and then the guy took pictures of the shoes and said, yeah, these are great shoes, you know. So this was a key kind of realization too, is that you know, there are certain sort of barriers in the world that maybe are not fair or shouldn't be there, and so this is something different that we can use this technology in different ways. But that's really how I got into it.
Thank you. Shivam, would you like to take the floor? We switched seats.
Yeah, so you all know me now. So banking through and through, live and breathe that stuff. For me, the story was I realized when I finished my assignment at Credit Suisse, which I spent the last sort of 3 years restructuring or supporting the restructure of a bank, is that something this huge, the potential impact of blockchain in banking, I best address that outside of the bank rather than being in the bank. That's my first point of call. Second is meeting Swisscom blockchain guys and having a nose into what they're up to. Then I realizing that I could be a serious ingredient. So let's talk about what integration means for us from a banking perspective, right? So we have to carefully pick the right fight at the right time, okay? So what that means for supply chain and trade finance, supply chain is just a straight up operational efficiency. There's a huge amount of inefficiency in the way the supply chain works, and as a result of the inefficiencies, there is a lot of operational risks involved in that. So there's not a lot selling there. But trade finance is quite interesting because for banks, it's a good entry point and is a low-hanging fruit. Trade finance is costly, and banks play a crucial role, and this is very, very important role that we play to facilitate finance, right? So there's clear financial advantages there if we use distributed ledger technology in the right way. To close some of the gaps, the problem there is that it's very fragmented. The information is very siloed, and there's data gaps. And all of that causes time. And time translates to risk in banking and finance. So that's the USP there for blockchain to completely revolutionize the way we do trade finance. Should I say more?
That's great. I think, Tom, again, we'd love to just hear from you. You've spoken for 15 minutes about Hedera Hashgraph. I think the audience would love to hear, I guess, a bit more about yourself and how you ended up involved.
Sure. Thank you. I started looking at this space probably in 2013. It took a while to find the appropriate way to enter it. I went to Yale undergrad and then was in technology for many years afterwards, but with the finance side. So I did at Bear Stearns, I did telecom and technology investment banking. I then did private equity in telecom and technology focus as well. And after business school, I kept doing a lot of seed investments, primarily in technology companies. And the last seed investment I made was in a company called Swirlds. Swirlds is the parent company and owns the patents for the Hashgraph consensus algorithm. And I just, through my network, got to meet Dr. Lehman Baird and Manus Harman, invested in Swirlds. And as I got to know them over time, you know, they had always planned to launch a public ledger, and we realized together that, you know, my network and skills were very complementary to theirs. And so I joined to help build out the public ledger. And, you know, these are two guys who are Air Force guys who are in Dallas. You know, I'm in New York City, and so we have very different approaches, very different experiences, and different networks. And I think that's it's proven to be a terrific relationship. They're fabulous to work for, And I'm lucky that these two guys are both professors, which means they teach instinctively every day. So it has been, a couple years of nonstop education by probably two of the most, deep subject matter experts in this space, which I'm fortunate to have benefited from. So it's been a terrific experience so far. And the other point here, I think we should make this, I guess it's sort of implied here, but we're all early. And so it may seem like, the market's crashed, how is this, where do we stand? This is early days in this technology. And so I think it's just incumbent on everyone here to recognize that you'll look back on this a couple of years down the road and you'll realize how few people actually knew about this technology at this time and how many more are going to know about it in the next 3-5 years and how prevalent it's going to be. So I think that's just, we should all kind of recognize that.
Thank you, Tom. And briefly, for a little bit more context, I run the reserve, but I started my career similar to Kamal. Well, he didn't start there, but Ernst & Young. I'm a chartered accountant, a self-taught developer, which meant that 6-7 years ago is when I first came across Bitcoin. I was then venture investing. We looked at some of the early assets and technology in this space. And as a technologist myself, and with my job being to invest in the future of technology, we passed on Bitcoin, we passed on the Mastercoin ICO, we passed on the Ethereum ICO. But I've effectively been following it full time for the last 4 or 5 years and working in it full time for the last 2.5. And it's because it's unbelievably important. Like Tom says, we're at the beginning of that curve, but the implications of having data that you can trust, even as a government, that data that you can absolutely trust, that you think is on your own servers and you think you can trust, but actually you may not be able to at the same level that you could if you implemented this technology. It's just the implications of this are so vast that, again, I'm so glad I'm in this space. And so, look, I want to put it back to the panelists, I want us to try and, again, focus on, what you can be implementing kind of like right now, and the changes that you can be making and the gains that you could be getting. And so actually, again, I'll probably go back to Kamal to kind of like start off where you kind of like left. Obviously, Swisscom has a vast and expansive background in banking, particularly in an infrastructure there. Do you want to talk through some of the solutions that you're helping clients implement right now, which is leveraging blockchain technology?
Sure. I mean, there are a lot of initiatives within Swisscom trying to provide the clients and the customer solutions to meet the requirements and the needs of society, community within Switzerland, be it in the infrastructure, be it in business application development, but also focusing on education and promotion. That's one of our main strategies within Swisscom. Before you start implementing something new or a product or think about the technology, you have to raise the awareness of the community, of society. So that's why Swisscom blockchain, when we started, the first thing we started thinking about is the infrastructure, means the crypto infrastructure, or the blockchain as a service. With other words, we started thinking about providing the whole infrastructure to the clients, but also to individuals to start, to start exploring blockchain technologies without having, without focusing on node hosting, deploying, monitoring, and all these pure computer science related activities. That's why we started with Blockchain Factory, and the concept was like providing the IT foundation, the IT infrastructure, so that a company, for example, can start interacting and developing blockchain-based applications without the need of providing the whole required infrastructure. And by the way, I think Dr. Khalid is going to elaborate later on that. It's something that we brought to the Middle East, especially to Oman, so that people can start working on real-life use cases. The other thing is the fact that Swisscom is the largest ICT infrastructure within Switzerland, and we are hosting more than 180 core banking systems in Switzerland. Give us a kind of a push in terms of thinking about what our banking clients will be asking for, because they have been like pushed by their clients to extend their portfolio to cover the crypto asset class, and they have been pushing us to help them to integrate adequate and corresponding solution to be ready to provide this kind of services. And the first product that we started thinking about is the digital asset custody. The digital asset custody is like the digital core banking system for the digital assets. And that was one of the topics that Dr. Khalid Wafi, the CTO of Alcatraz, was elaborating on in the previous panelist, is how to provide the safekeeping of the digital assets. Basically, what we decided is to provide a kind of an appliance, a combination of very advanced hardware with customized software application on the top of it to make sure that, to make sure that access to these crypto assets is securely maintained and only authorized roles and people can transact or can perform transactions at this level. Then we realized, like 3 months later, before we started this product, that the role of safekeeping has been like a central role for a bank. But safekeeping in terms of crypto assets or digital assets is not enough, because people, they would like to start trading or buy and sell or trade or whatever. And for this kind of activities, you need to develop other components who can interact with digital asset custody in terms of securely transact and publish the transaction to the blockchain platforms. Because, I mean, I just want to explain the most of the transactions in the blockchain platforms are settled in the blockchain platforms in itself. So what you safekeep is like, what you keep safe is like the private key, the access to your digital assets in the network. So that's why we come up with the idea of the relay services. Relay services is a kind of a gateway that links your digital asset custody with the public blockchain platform, and you as the owner of this digital asset custody, you will be enabled to transact and perform different transactions from the digital asset custody at your bank and transmit all these transactions to the public. Those two components were like the most critical ones for the banks. But before the bank started providing this kind of services, there have been a very big challenge, which is the crypto compliance. So the crypto compliance, when we talk about the crypto compliance, then you need to make sure that the classical compliance is fulfilled, and you need to extend these requirements to cover the digital aspect. For example, tracking back where is the money coming from, who's owning it, and do all the AML and analytic tasks on the top of it. But fortunately, FINMA, our financial regulator in Switzerland, have been very collaborative with all financial institutes and all the companies, and they provided a lot of educational workshops to help us in shaping up solutions and come up with a kind of a framework how to deal with this new crypto asset class. Just to summarize, in the banking sector, the three components which were very critical in Switzerland is the regulatory framework from FINMA, because there have been no clear instructions what to do, like in terms of A, B, C, D, but there have been a kind of framework. There have been some kind of KO criteria. Don't touch this criteria, and anything you do, it's fine. The second one was like the digital asset custody, so safekeeping of crypto asset class. And the other one, or last component, was the relay services, which is like enabling the clients, but also financial institutes to securely transmit and submit transactions outside from the digital asset custody.
So I think if I understand correct, you're saying that Swisscom is allowing banks that can traditionally work with fiat and store value and allow payments to happen on top of that and can accept clients in that world. You'll allow them to start operating in this new world, accept and store and hold the value in digital assets, transfer that value, and also ensure that they are compliant with AML, KYC, right?
Exactly. But there have been some exceptions because Swisscom is acting globally, and of course, the regulation in itself differentiates from a country to another. For example, we have other requirements and other solution offering in Switzerland than in Singapore, for example, or than in US or in other countries. But I do believe the target is the same, but the ways to get there are a bit different. But at the end of the day, it's about how to help financial institutes to extend their portfolio to cover the crypto asset class. And there we jump in as integration partner.
Thank you. So to move away maybe from kind of banking, where there are already very large, potentially very old systems that are running a lot of that world. Darius, you're in a very different industry where, and I've had a small excursion into food and run a manufacturing business myself as well. There is no technology. And there are massive inefficiencies and massive potential for frauds and things that you mentioned about. So do you want to just talk about, I guess, like it's a very, very blue ocean for sort of improvements and some of the stuff that you're actually practically working on and improving kind of like now?
Spot on. Well, it's a pleasure for me to see how the banking industry and certain governments try to figure out how to use blockchain because of the legacy complexity and mission-critical applications. Banking, if you do something wrong there, disaster will be right here, right now. There are industries where that blockchain as such can bring almost zero risks, and the only it can do good and improvement. So as correctly noted by you, if we go away from the complex historical and we go to the industries, and that food is only one of them, a counterfeiting food, actually, to be more precise. A, it's manual, a lot. B, with all the due respect with the food authorities, food inspections and the customs, it's extremely hard to do. To the extent that I know, that typically the customs and the food authorities, they're able to sample and check 0.01% of the food which is critical, which is coming into country or being produced in the country. And then provided everything works very efficiently. And then again, you have to trust those 10 people, and if they say yes, that means yes. Nobody else knows how to check what they're saying. No knowledge. Not to mention that they're only ones who have that, lots of millions of equipment. Blockchain here brings speed, and the issues of speed, which was very nice for me to hear that the blockchain is slightly slow, and the plane, it's not a problem. So that problem has not to be solved there because it's not a problem. You know, you enter the data with the slow speed is still fine as long as you can read fast. Then complexity of the digital assets is not a problem in this industry, and I can continue for half an hour explaining what's not a problem. So in a nutshell, area we're in, we're very happy because blockchain speeds up the whole thing. And how you can trust blockchain. Everybody is arguing what the blockchain can do this and that and how, but nobody is arguing whether it's safe enough after you have at least 6 steps in it. This is sufficient if you find an industry way apply it. Yes, artificial intelligence will be a huge issue, and the investments into artificial intelligence to actually process the whole data, as I mentioned before, will be a huge issue. And actually investments into artificial intelligence continue to be a huge issue. And if any students of the university will continue their careers in artificial intelligence for the next 10 to 20 years, then A, the job, and B, more than 6-digit salary, or for sure 6-digit salary is given and guaranteed, and you will be asked as a specialist anywhere in the world, up to date, right, 1 million new jobs are for artificial intelligence experts. However, the blockchain is fueling that. So if you look at the food industry, lots of manual work, lots of trust on workers, and lots of faking the food, not on the logistics chain, not at the supermarket, not at the restaurant, not at home. Sometimes it's even before, at the factory. They say the product is this and that, but if you look inside, not necessarily. Not to mention that there is a counterfeiting. The factory produces the right stuff, but there is, you know, repackaging and repackaging and repackaging until it reaches the end user. And you can track to the extent you like with all the smart codes. And I have the latest and the greatest technology on the smart codes in my bag there with all the holograms and you name it. You are still tracking the package. You're still not tracking what you're actually about to consume. And if somebody has printed that smart hologram, then somebody else has the same machinery and will print the same. And it's still 10 times, if not 100 times cheaper than to produce the right stuff. So we found a series of industries and the faking of these type of goods, one of them, whether the blockchain brings zero risks, only fuels up very fast. And as I said, it's easy to say, it's hard to do, but that's the way it works. We're very happy to say that we are checking a lot of things. And actually, our latest example, we were scaring the big time, one of the best retailers in several countries by now, by taking samples of their food off the shelves. And depending on food category, what we found inside, mostly without opening the package, it depends, was not exactly what the packaging was saying. The last example we had, I'm not even talking about extra virgin oil. As I said, it's 4-to-1 up to 5-to-1. If you're buying 4, you're not buying what it says. 1, you're buying what it says, once again. But on many, many other things. And it goes to the minced meat, it goes to the whether there is a pork, traces of meat, you name it. And when there's somebody shows in the kitchen there is a pork, and you don't want that in your meal, how come you know? There's no way. So here there are massive application of the technology as a blockchain. Leave crypto aside. That's a different story. They just live on the blockchain. Leave crypto aside. Nothing to do with that. But the blockchain as a trust, where you can apply right now and solve the problems which were unsolved for decades, and speed up the problems which were not done for decades. Help governments to collect more taxes, which was not done for decades. Stop smuggling, or stop mafia, as we say, which was not done in that aspect for decades, and make life for your people more better, more safe. You can speed up the whole thing. And we can demonstrate that today. It works.
Thank you. It's super interesting, right? Safety, security, and cost efficiencies, and greater tax revenues, if you care about that side of things. To throw over to you, perhaps, again, Tom, I think you are interacting with potentially the broadest set of industries and use cases as like a base layer, kind of like protocol. Do you want to maybe give a couple of examples of, I guess, either what you think are the most interesting use cases of Hashgraph, or of the projects which are latest in development and actually having the most kind of like impact at this moment?
I think that the example I showed was one of the more compelling in terms of life-saving ones. So that was the Open Pharma example. The one maybe I'll talk about, just to give a sense of scale required, is that in logistics. And so it has to do with pallets. And so if you look at the number of pallets that move around the world with goods, there are hundreds of millions of pallets that exist. And a couple companies together control 100 million pallets. There's about, I don't know, whatever, from 20% or so of the total. And these pallets are always moving. Pallets then have a transmitter, and that transmitter transmits once every 15 minutes, location and potentially temperature. And those are just starting to be deployed now. But what's interesting to think about is who cares where a pallet is, and it differs based on where it is. So when you order something, the person that shipped it cares about it, the person who's getting it cares about it. But then when it gets to a port, the port probably cares where it is. Then it gets to a truck. That trucking company probably cares where it is. Then it gets to a train. The train company probably cares where it is. And then it gets to a truck again, and that trucking company probably cares where it is. So with distributed ledgers, you have the ability for each person, each company, each type of company in the ecosystem to buy the data of those transmissions, those location and temperature transmissions at each step along the way, only where it's relevant to them. So the port can buy the data on the pallets just in the port. Doesn't need to know about it before, doesn't need to know about it afterwards, but just there. And that, I think, is something we can understand. That's kind of the IoT business-to-business concept, which I think is the future. The other thing to think about, though, is 100 million pallets transmitting once every 15 minutes. Do you know how many transactions a second that is? It's about 100,000. It's an enormous amount. That ends up to be something like 3 trillion transactions a year. So that is one, and maybe they'll be batched. Maybe there are ways in which they can be compressed. Maybe you don't actually get all of those, but it just gives you a sense that that is one use case that is in the minimum tens of thousands of transactions a second for it to be fully deployed, and for which the number of parties who can be involved and dive into it and actually transact and find data relevant is in the hundreds, if not thousands. Airlines as well, I didn't mention. So I think that is just and these sensors are being deployed now. So I just throw that out there as an example of some of the scale of transactions in a very real world deployment and environment.
Is there another great example, just whilst we're still with you, that's in a completely different industry that you might be able to give?
I think a completely different industry would be media, and so one application being developed on us is a way for artists to sell directly to consumers their songs. And the way in which they're doing this is sort of interesting, where instead of paying a record label or signing over money to a record label or profits to a record label, this model is the artist will basically, using micropayments, pay the first 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 people to listen to their songs. And there'll be micropayments per minute, per song. Not sure exactly what that amount is, but it's in the pennies or sub dollar amount probably. And then the more people that listen to it, the system, the algorithm shows the popularity of songs. And so if people listen to the complete song and actually like it, that then is an indication and shows the popularity that spreads. So other members of the ecosystem see the songs that have been listened to, and they see the people they follow who listen to songs. They then turn around and actually pay to listen to the songs. And so then it went from the artist basically seeding the network and seeding the songs and paying for that, to people in turn paying to listen to the songs. And when they pay to listen to the song, given smart contracts, the deployment of those very small increments go directly to the band members, to the artists in the prearranged split. You may not know this, but when you listen to Spotify, the artists get just several pennies per song, and it can take 2 years to get those revenues. Using distributed ledger, those revenues could be distributed almost real time. And so I think that's more of a consumer-facing application being developed that's called Hero.fm.
Thank you. Siobhan, maybe, you're building a bank. And I can imagine, that if it doesn't get much realer than that, right, in terms of implementation, right? Do you want to just maybe give us, I don't know if it's a lesson or just talk about how, you just talk a little bit about your journey of like building a bank in this new era.
Yeah, so I think the key thing is what we are trying to address is to redefine banking for the modern commerce. The way that we live and work has changed, but however, the traditional banking struggles to meet our needs to an extent. That's because the back end of the bank hasn't changed in decades, right? The front end has changed, fintech. So the user experience is great, but everything else is old-fashioned, siloed systems, data gaps, and the rest of it. So building a bank, what does that mean for us? What that means is we can address all the problems the big mainstream banks suffering from day one. That's number one. Number two, we can structure a balance sheet purposeful to serve a segment or a sector. And number three, we can be truly digital and customer-centric from day one because we don't have to change anything. So I think this connects back to the infrastructure conversation. Infrastructure is pretty simple. There's a new world, there's an old world. The new world needs new infrastructure. Someone's got to pay for it and build it. The old world already has paid for the infrastructure. So nobody wants to rehaul the infrastructure, right? But they want to do incremental changes and find opportunities. So what does that mean for infrastructure provider? It means a lot because infrastructure is currently facing a lot of implications because of what happens in the real world, which is regulation. Regulation has a direct impact on banking infrastructure. And if you're an ICT company, you will feel that sooner. So they also see this shift and they want to make sure that they're in the right place as and when the business transformation, which is key, happens and materializes, then they can provide the necessary infrastructure. It may not be the new set of infrastructure, but there will be some level of change in infrastructure. So building a bank, we can also take on that journey and be there before everybody else gets to that change because we don't have anything to change. We can just build a single platform that we can use anywhere in the world from. That is difficult for a big bank to achieve, and I can draw that on a piece of paper and go to an ICT provider and make it happen. So we have huge amount of possibilities of addressing everything the big banks are struggling to achieve, and then we can also use that experience to show how we can redefine banking.
Thank you. It doesn't get much realer, does it, right?
No.
Justin, we've been mentioning digital assets have come up a couple of times, and that can be a sort of confusing term. If you're looking at something at Bitcoin, when we're talking about digital asset, it's literally the digital thing which is being moved around. But actually, digital assets and tokens, which they sort of encompass, can actually refer to a lot of real-world things that might mean a lot more here. Do you want to, I guess, like maybe talk a little bit about tokenization? I guess like why that matters and sort of how that relates to digital assets.
Yeah, so what is tokenization? I think to have an understanding of what that is, you first have to know what a token is. And before you know what a token is, you have to know what a UTXO is. And how many people know what a UTXO is? Yeah. Okay, so it's difficult to talk about tokenization until you really understand what it is we're talking about. So just also a plug for my training session this week. If you're around, I'll be here for the next few days, and we'll actually be going through this process and talking about this in depth. So a UTXO is an unspent transaction output, right? And these are the things that you're actually moving around when you use Bitcoin. And what gives a UTXO its value? these are interesting questions that we'll address over the next few days. So when we talk about tokens generally today, most people are referring to this idea of just giving someone else your money and then you get something back. And that something back is some sort of receipt or it's some sort of coupon code or something like this, and then this is called a token. So to date, most of these token projects have just been copies of Bitcoin, and there's really not that much, that's been changed. A lot of people have been issuing tokens, and they treat it as equity. So they said, well, here's a new technology, therefore we don't have to follow the existing laws, and so they just issue a security, either knowingly or unknowingly, but they do this in a way to get money and enrich themselves, right? So anytime you give someone else money, there's something on the other side of that trade. Most of these people are wanting Bitcoin, or they're wanting something else, or just a bank transfer, right? But for some reason, they're selling these tokens. So what is a token? Really, a token is nothing. It's just a string of characters. But with that said, there's some really interesting applications for this concept. So when it's done properly, and it can be done properly, it's just difficult to do because you have to create an ecosystem. So you really have to think about what the problem is that you're trying to solve. So what problems can tokens and this concept of tokens really solve? And it can solve some really interesting problems, like what we talked about earlier, where a central bank could issue a local or regional currency. You could do this using a token, and it's actually really easy to do. Like we talked about over the break, you could do this in an afternoon. It just takes a few minutes to do. However, the real question is, well, do people then see that as money? Can they use it as money? Number one, who issued it? Do they have the authority? Do you respect the authority of the person or the entity or the group that issued it? How do they know that more won't be issued, right? You have to have full trust in the issuer. Number two, how do you even use the token once you have, how do you take delivery of a token, and then what do you do with it? So you need to think how the end user is going to interact with this thing. And so most people on the planet have smartphones, and so most likely you're going to want to build some sort of smartphone interface. Again, a lot of people have mobile banking applications where you can handle your current and savings accounts, and you can send transfers. And this is the same concept. So it's not too far off where young people aren't going to take the time to go to a bank and go through this procedure and formality of opening an account and pay the bank money to use their services when they can just download a free app like the ones that are out there for every cryptocurrency. And you can download this app, and then you can do work online for someone in another country, and they can pay you in cryptocurrency, and then you can take that cryptocurrency and then pay someone else, and you can buy t-shirts or hats or whatever. In a lot of cases, you can even buy your food if there's some sort of vendor that's taking cryptocurrency. So it's all about bootstrapping this ecosystem. That's the most important thing to think through, I think. So we've seen this happen over the last few years where people get excited and they want to try some sort of token project, but then the real thing is you have to think through that problem in deep detail and then think about all of the existential or all of the tendrils, like where people really end up using the technology.
Thank you, Justin. We've been cut a few minutes short, so I'm afraid that is all that we end up with time for. Thank you very much for coming. If there's one lesson I think we might be able to learn, it's that, again, this is not a theory. Everyone here on stage is busy implementing this technology into the real world and seeing the benefits for it. Thank you very much for your time.